On a misty afternoon in March 1977, a 6-year-old girl named Mary Boyle ran across a quiet field in rural Ireland and vanished without a trace. Her twin sister was only yards away. Her family searched, her community searched, and for nearly half a century, Ireland has been searching too. This is the oldest missing child case in the nation's history, a mystery shrouded in silence, grief, and unanswered questions. Before we go any further, please hit like so more people can see this story, and subscribe to the channel with all notifications on, so you never miss a cold case investigation. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Every interaction helps keep Mary's memory alive. It was Saturday, March 18, 1977, the day after St. Patrick's Day. The small, remote village of Cashellard, near Ballyshannon in County Donegal, rested quietly under grey, heavy skies. It was the kind of countryside that looked timeless, a place seemingly untouched by the frantic pace of the modern world. Rolling green fields, divided by ancient stone walls, sheep grazing on distant hills, and the smell of peat smoke curling from chimneys. Life here was slow, predictable, and deeply interconnected. 6-year-old Mary Boyle and her identical twin sister were visiting their grandparents' small farmhouse as they often did. The Boyle family lived in nearby Kinkislaff, but the grandparents' farm was a second home to them. The girls were inseparable. They shared everything, the same matching coats, the same bright smiles, and an endless, shared curiosity about the world around them. In a place this isolated, they were each other's universe. That Saturday morning was one of domestic calm. The national holiday had passed, and the house had settled back into its routine. The adults, Mary's mother and Boyle and her grandparents, chatted over tea in the kitchen, discussing farm matters and local news. The twins played in and out of the yard, their occasional laughter punctuating the quiet afternoon. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing felt wrong. But within hours, the deep, abiding peace of that Irish afternoon would be shattered forever. After lunch, Mary's mother decided to run a quick errand. The girls, Mary and Anne, stayed behind, playing near the house under the watchful eye of their uncle, Jerry Gallagher, who was also visiting. Around 3:30 p.m., Uncle Jerry offered to walk partway across a nearby field to visit a neighbor's house, which lay just over the hill. Mary, always energetic and adventurous, decided to tag along. She ran ahead of the adults, down a muddy path that cut through the farmland. The track was uneven, bordered by patches of marshy bog, tall grass, and a few sparse trees. A light, cold drizzle had started to fall, making the air damp and chilly. Somewhere along that short walk, a distance of no more than half a mile, Mary disappeared. Her uncle would later recall those crucial moments with a clarity that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw Mary running ahead of him, a small, bright figure in her colorful coat. He saw her go up a small hillock or mound in the path. For a brief instant, she dropped out of his sight as she went over the other side. When he reached the same spot, perhaps only a minute or two later, she was gone. He didn't panic. The path forked. One way led to the neighbor's house, the other looped back toward the farm. He assumed that she, perhaps tired of the walk or getting wet from the drizzle, had simply decided to turn around and run back to her grandparents' house. It was the only logical explanation. He continued on to the neighbor's house, paid his brief visit, and then walked back along the same path to the farm, fully expecting to find Mary there, probably sipping a cup of warm milk. But when he walked into the kitchen, Mary wasn't there. Her twin sister but Mary was not. At first, still nobody panicked. Confusion was the first emotion. "I thought she'd come back," her uncle said. The family began calling out her name, their voices still calm. "Mary! Mary!" They expected her to pop out from behind a bush or a stone wall, playing a game of hide-and-seek. But as the minutes stretched on and the gray sky began to darken, the calls grew louder, more high-pitched. The shouts of "Mary!" began to curdle with desperation. The silence that answered them back from the field was total. Something was terribly wrong. By early evening, the alarm had spread like wildfire through the tiny community of Cashellard. In this part of the world, a crisis for one family is a crisis for all. Neighbors, local farmers, and volunteers flooded the area. They left their dinners, pulled on their wellies, and went out into the encroaching night with flashlights and lanterns. The search was immediate and frantic. They searched fields, barns, fences, and rivers. The primary focus was the bog. These peat bogs were treacherous, especially for a small child. The ground was soft, deceptive, and capable of swallowing a person whole. The collective fear was that Mary had slipped, fallen into a hidden pool of water, and drowned. As darkness fell, the local Gardaí, Ireland's national police, joined the search. The community combed through every ditch and hedgerow, moving in human chains through the dark, their flashlight beams cutting through the mist. With the next day's light, the search intensified. Helicopters were brought in to scan the terrain from above. Divers, clad in wetsuits against the freezing water, scoured nearby lakes and streams. But there was no sign of Mary. Not a single footprint in the mud that pointed in a clear direction. Not a scrap of brightly colored fabric from her coat snagged on a barbed wire fence. Not a single lost welly. And, most chillingly of all, no sound. No one had heard a scream, the sound of a car speeding away, nothing. The only trace of her was her absence. An absolute silence that hung over Donegal like a fog that refused to lift. Over the next few days, the Gardaí expanded their search radius. Roadblocks were set up. Anyone who might have seen anything that afternoon was interviewed. Witnesses described seeing a small girl in a red jacket and wellies near the fields, but nothing beyond that. The official theory at first, the only one that made any sense, was that Mary had wandered off, gotten lost in the vast and confusing bogland, and died by misadventure. But as days turned into weeks, and the massive search turned up absolutely nothing, that explanation began to weaken. The bogs were drained, a Herculean task. Entire sections of the bog were dug up. Nothing was found. If it wasn't an accident, only one other possibility remained. Investigators began to suspect something darker, that Mary had been abducted. But this presented an even greater puzzle. There were no strange cars reported in the area. No strangers had been seen. No cries were heard. In a village as close-knit as Cashellard, where everyone knew every car and every face, the idea of an outsider sneaking in, taking a child from a rural path at 3:30 in the afternoon, and vanishing unseen, seemed impossible. It just didn't add up. And yet, the possibility lingered, unsettling and awful. If not a stranger, then who? The fear began to change, turning inward. For Mary's parents, Anne and Charlie Boyle, life became a waking nightmare. They stayed at the farmhouse for weeks, waiting for a knock on the door that never came, waiting for the phone to ring with news. Every day, they stared out the window at the same green fields, now a landscape of torment, wondering where their little girl could be. For Mary's twin sister, and life changed in a way no one else could ever truly understand. She grew up carrying a void no child should ever have to bear. The other half of herself, her constant companion, was gone without explanation. "It's like losing part of your soul," she once said in an interview years later. You look in the mirror, and you see the person who's missing. As the years passed and the 1970s bled into the 1980s, the Boyle family's heartbreak turned to frustration. The case faded from the national headlines. There were no new leads. No arrests. No answers. It became Ireland's coldest cold case. Over the decades, in the vacuum left by a lack of facts, theories about what happened to Mary Boyle multiplied. Some still believed she was abducted by a stranger, perhaps a traveler passing through on the main road. Others suggested she might have known her abductor, someone from the community, someone who knew she would be there. But one theory, whispered for years in Donegal, suggested something even more disturbing, that powerful people may have interfered with the investigation to protect someone connected to the case. This theory exploded into the public consciousness years later, when investigative journalist Gemma O'Doherty produced a documentary titled Mary Boyle, The Untold Story. The documentary suggested that a politician from the era's ruling party, Fianna Fáil, had contacted the Gardaí and instructed them not to question or arrest a particular suspect. The claims by O'Doherty, and a retired Garda detective who backed her, sparked national outrage. It reignited interest in the case and led to calls for a new, independent investigation. The Gardaí vehemently denied any political interference or cover-up, calling the allegations baseless. But the controversy left a stain, a shadow of doubt that still hangs over the case today. Had the truth been suppressed to protect someone? Despite renewed public pressure, no one has ever been charged. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, Mary's family, especially her sister, continued to fight tirelessly to keep her name alive. They gave interviews, organized marches, and pleaded with authorities to release the case files that remained sealed. Cadaver dogs were brought in from other parts of Europe. Forensic experts used ground-penetrating radar to scan the soil for anomalies. Fields near where Mary was last seen were excavated, based on new tips and psychics. Each time, the search ended the same way: nothing. Still, the family refused to stop. Someone out there knows what happened, and said in a 2017 interview, her voice steel-lined with resolve, "And I will never stop until Mary is found." Even after more than 40 years, the fields of Cashllard still draw visitors who leave flowers or notes by the old paths. The place where a child vanished has become a kind of sacred ground, a symbol of loss, mystery, and endurance. As the decades rolled on, Ireland changed dramatically. The Celtic tiger brought economic prosperity. Technology evolved. The internet connected the world. New generations grew up hearing Mary Boyle's name like a ghost story, the little girl from Donegal who was never found. But for her family, this was no myth. It was the defining absence of their lives. Imagine living for nearly 50 years without knowing where your child is. Without being able to bury her, without a grave to visit, without the simple, terrible closure of saying goodbye. Every knock at the door, every anonymous letter, every new, false lead rips the same wound open. Even now, the Boyle family clings to hope. Not necessarily of finding Mary alive, a hope that faded decades ago, but of bringing her home, of giving her a dignified burial. Today, Mary Boyle's disappearance remains Ireland's oldest missing child case. No arrests, no confirmed suspect, no body. In 2016, the Gardaí formally upgraded the investigation to a murder inquiry. They utilized modern forensic techniques and began re-interviewing witnesses. But after all these years, no physical evidence has ever surfaced. Some witnesses from that day have since passed away, taking any secrets they might have had to the grave. Others remain silent. The case files remain sealed. And the questions linger, louder than ever. Was Mary abducted by someone she trusted? Did the initial investigation, in its haste to believe it was an accident, miss a crucial lead? Or was there, truly, a cover-up to protect someone close to power? The truth, after all these years, remains buried. Perhaps somewhere in the desolate peat bogs of Donegal. Or perhaps, and more likely, within human silence. The disappearance of Mary Boyle is more than an unsolved mystery. It is a wound in Ireland's heart. For nearly half a century, her family has lived in the shadow of that March afternoon, waiting for answers that may never come. Her story reminds us of the fragility of innocence, how quickly it can be stolen, and how deeply it can scar those left behind. It also shows the power of persistence, of a love that refuses to fade even when hope seems lost. Mary was 6 years old. She loved playing with her twin sister, helping her grandparents, and running barefoot across the fields in the summer. She deserves to be found. Until that day comes, the question continues to echo on the winds of Donegal. Where is Mary Boyle? What do you think really happened to Mary Boyle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, but please keep them respectful to her memory and her family. If you'd like to see more cold case stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it, because keeping these stories alive is how we honor the victims and, one day, maybe help bring them home.